Hello, friends and followers of Syriana Analysis. Today I have a very special guest. He is the former UK ambassador to Syria between 2003 and 2006, Mr. Peter Ford. He will share with us his insights on the current ongoing war in Syria, but also we will focus on the Helsinki meeting between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin. Mr. Peter, thank you very much for accepting my invitation. Your insights are very valuable to our audience, who mostly come from Western states, and they are excited to hear your analysis in this regard.
It's a pleasure. I look forward to our chat.
Actually, yesterday I was watching the coverage of the, let's say, the major mainstream media outlets regarding the Trump-Putin meeting, and the lists to say it was hysterical, and there were even hashtags on Twitter. It went viral. It says the treason meeting between the both sides. I heard a lot of arguments in this regard, but what's the real reason behind this resistance that Putin and Trump could meet and agree on certain things in international relations?
I agree. The reactions have been hysterical, grotesque, surreal, in fact. It's as though people were afraid that there might be an outbreak of peace between the United States and Russia. It really is, for someone who's coming from outside, there's no way they could understand the fears, the hysteria that are being expressed. I find it hard to understand myself. I think the West is in a state of neurotic hysteria with Russophobia. It affects mainly the United States, and it involves, of course, their election, but it goes way beyond that. It seems that the United States has a visceral need to have an enemy, and they are quite nostalgic for the days of the Cold War. And also, let's not forget their vested interests here, the armament industry, many lobbies, the think tanks, so-called, all have a vested interest in ramping up hostility to Russia and Iraq, which is a kind of little Satan for America.
Actually, Mr. Peter, the hysteria, yesterday I was even read an article in one of the mainstream media websites that the ball that Mr. Putin gifted to Mr. Trump, that the ball could be contaminated by chemicals, that he should be careful about this. They went that far in the conspiracy theories, and at the end of the day, people, I don't want only to name myself, but many people in the alternative media, we are being accused of conspiracy theories, unfortunately. But Putin, in this meeting, he mentioned that Syria could be the practical example of solving the crisis through dialogue between the United States and Russia. Do you think we reached to that stage where United States and Russia are able to cooperate in order to solve the Syrian crisis?
I very much doubt it, unfortunately. I think Putin was being diplomatic there, rather than being objective. Certainly, if there was a good working relationship between America and Russia, it could ease the end of the conflict in Syria. But, for example, they might work together on the reconstruction of Syria, and there was a little hint, perhaps, about that towards the end of the press conference segment about Syria, where they talked about humanitarian assistance. It was a little hard to follow what they were saying, partly because Trump clearly doesn't understand the brief. He doesn't have a clue about what is really happening in Syria. He seems to think it's mainly a humanitarian crisis, when in fact the real crisis is over reconstruction and recovery. They could make a start by America lifting sanctions. That would be an immense...
That would be a good start.
That would be an excellent start, but I greatly fear that is not what they had in mind. In fact, there were a number of puzzling references during this press conference that was rather hard to interpret. For example, Putin referred to carrying humanitarian cargo. Well, what humanitarian cargo might this be? There is, in fact, no need to air transport humanitarian cargo into Syria. All they have to do is cross the border from Turkey or Lebanon or Jordan. Humanitarian cargo is not transported into Syria by air. And I couldn't help wondering whether this was not an echo of those rumors that were swirling a day or two before the summit about the white helmets and their evacuation from the south. This would also be a nice humanitarian gesture of sorts.
Speaking about the South, Mr. Peter, Putin called on the implementation of the UN Security Council Resolution 338, which was adopted in October 1974 after the war of 1973 between Syria, Israel, and Egypt. Which this resolution itself originally calls for the implementation of Resolution 242 of 1967. In this regard, do you think Putin's intention when he mentioned the resolution 338 was aimed on the Golan Heights, or he only wants for the ceasefire agreement to be restored as it was before 2011?
Well, it could be either, but I just reread the transcript, and it does look like Putin, he went back on himself, and he brought in from nowhere, Resolution 338. And knowing Putin, this will have been done for a reason, with calculation. Nobody talked about 338 for over a decade. This is really could be quite significant. This is putting back onto the international agenda the issue of Israeli withdrawal from the Golan. The Israeli media have been careful to avoid covering this aspect of what was discussed. They've been preening themselves on how both America and Russia look after Israeli interests, but they are forgetting the most important point, that their position, Israel's position, has weakened considerably since the start of the conflict. Compare the situation today with what it was before 2011, when the Golan was absolutely quiet, when there were no Hezbollah anywhere near the Golan, no Iranians, and now the Israelis are having to live with a situation where not only have they failed to create a kind of deeper buffer zone, they were talking about this even quite recently.
True.
This has been completely taken off the agenda. Not only that, but in May, I think it was, for the first time in decades, the Israelis had to see an exchange of fire with Syrian forces on the Golan. And in recent days, they have had to endure the sight of drones, for the moment not armed, crossing several kilometers into Israeli territory. Now, this should be worrying the Israelis, and I suspect that their analysts are busy right now trying to analyze what Putin meant by raising 338, which is a nightmare for them.
So what you're saying, Mr. Peter, at this particular moment, the balance of power is in the favor of Syria and its allies. Therefore, Israel is the party interested to solve this situation in the southern part of Syria in a diplomatic way, in order to push away at least the Iranian and the Hezbollah forces from the Golan Heights, in order to isolate Syria militarily and politically once again, as it was was the intention after the Camp David agreement and other peace agreements to isolate Syria at that time from Egypt. Now the allies of Syria changed, and Israel sees that there is an imminent threat, not only by the Syrian army. This time there are allies who are ready to fight side by side with the Syrian army, who already succeeded against one of the most brutal terrorist organizations in Syria.
Well, one interpretation of Putin's apparently throwaway remark about 338 was that there could be a grand bargain, not the one that the Israelis and the Americans have been talking about, not just the Iranian withdrawal in return for US withdrawal, but a complete withdrawal of all foreign forces, except Russia, and that includes US, Turkey, and Israel.
Mm-hmm.
That is one interpretation of what he was saying. And if the Russians are famous for taking the long view, they may glimpse over the horizon a prospect of dragging the Americans and the Israelis to the negotiating table over the Golan. Certainly if the Americans and the Israelis want Iran to leave Syria, then this would be a logical discussion. Everybody withdraws from Syria.
True. Mr. Peter, let's take our discussion into the international level, because yesterday Trump mentioned something. For me, it's funny because he said that our relationship was never been as worse as it is now, which is true, but this has changed after this couple of hours of meeting between him and Mr. Putin. Do you think the problems between the US and Russia are, these both guys are able to solve all these problems within a couple of hours? What future for the relationship between Russia and the United States, in your opinion, after this meeting?
Well, there are many problems ahead. I don't think even Trump and Putin would be optimistic, even though their personal relationship may be good, even though they've established a better atmosphere. The fact is that Trump doesn't control very much in America. He is in office but not in power.
Mm-hmm.
The only times when the Donald is in power are at 3 o'clock in the morning when everybody's asleep, but he can send a tweet and nobody can stop him, or when he's having a one-on-one meeting with another big international leader.
Mm.
The rest of the day, he is tied down by the literal men who constrain him constantly. The bureaucrats, the security state, the deep state. A deep state, incidentally, which it would be better called the shallow state,
mm-hmm.
because they are coming to the surface without shame. The move on the eve of the visit to the meeting in Helsinki to charge 12 Russians with espionage. This was transparently a move by the security establishment, the deep state, to torpedo the president's talk and to undermine the president personally.
Mm-hmm.
This is absolutely unbelievable. America is a rogue state, a dysfunctional state, where the head of state is not only ignored, but actively undermined by the security forces who are nominally working for him.
Mr. Peter, my last question for you is also related to the topics that been discussed between Trump and Putin, which is the issue of Iran. In this regards, we heard Putin praising the agreement P5+1, and at the same time, Trump said it's one of the worst the agreements. So, do you expect here that Trump would succeed to enforce some sort of renegotiation for this agreement in order to include other factors in the P5+1 in order to become a more comprehensive deal in the region?
I very much doubt it, although Putin did, in another of those cryptic remarks, say that he understood American concerns about Iran's behavior in the region. So I don't totally rule out that Russia may be open to some broadening of the arrangements with Iran, if that would give Trump an escape route to escape from his decision to end the nuclear agreement. But on balance, it must be more likely that they simply agreed to differ. They will go their own separate ways on Iran. You see, my analysis is that Trump has to be hardline on Iran because that's the Israel lobby in America. That is what he's counting on to protect him against the deep state.
Mm-hmm.
He cannot afford to have enemies surrounding him. That he needs the backing of the Israel lobby.
And at the end, every empire, whether it is, you can see the empire as it was before, a few decades before, or a shadow empire as it is now in the era of the United States, every empire needs an enemy in order to, for its continuation and in order to create a reason for its expansion. Mr. Peter, thank you very much for your insights and for your contribution on Syriana analysis. I really appreciate your time, and my audience in Syriana analysis send you their regards to you.
Thank you very much. I respect and appreciate your own contribution to what Syriana analysis is doing fantastic work.
Thank you very much, sir, and I hope to see you soon again.